think we should start, and then I'll admit anyone else who wants to join. And we'll make the recording available of this event for other LEDC members who I cannot see have joined. But anyway, we have a small but focused group. Let me say that and begin. Welcome everybody to the Law Environment Development Center seminar. Today we have a very interesting topic up for discussion, which is on just energy transition to facilitate household energy access and alleviate energy poverty. To discuss this, we have with us two very amazing guests who have worked together on a policy brief with this title. First, we have Dr. Mohlakoana, who is a researcher at the Center for Sustainability Transitions at the Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Unfortunately, she is having some technical problems, so will not be able to switch on her camera, but she can hear us and we'll be able to hear her. So again, Zoom brings its own surprises. But we welcome Dr. Mohlakoana, who has worked for over 18 years in energy policy implementation, energy access, in gender mainstreaming in the energy sector and these kind of areas. Currently, she's working on a project focusing on just energy transitions, including household energy access and energy poverty and livelihoods. Joining her, we have Peta Wolpe, who is a practitioner in urban energy and climate change, also joining us from South Africa today. She's worked in different capacities over many years, bringing a very rich experience from her work with different poor communities, grassroots communities, and even high-level stakeholders, politicians, and so on. She's worked in areas of urban energy and climate change, including gender, energy poverty, and access, and low-carbon development. She's currently a trustee of the Harold Wolpe Memorial Trust and an associate director of the South-South-North organization. So we welcome you both, and over to you. We can't wait to hear your insights from all the work that you have done. Dr. Mohlakoana and Ms. Wolpe.
Thank you, and thank you for that introduction and for inviting us, and lovely to be here. I know one person who has joined from South Africa, which is lovely. Can you see the presentation, and is it on full screen, or have I got it only on?
It's not on full screen.
There it should be. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna start, and then Nthabi will take over. And yeah, we've this presentation and what we're going to discuss is based on a policy brief that we did this year for an organization called TIPS. And of course, now the full name of the organization has gone right out of my head, sorry. But they're doing quite a lot of work in this space. And in fact, I'm working with them on a just energy transition project. And so some of the pictures that will be on the presentation come from the region where we're working. And I'm going to give a lot of the sort of introduction and the South African background. I know one person knows our context, but I'm not sure about the other people here, or the people that might listen to the recording afterwards. And so I'm setting the scene, and then Nthabi will hone in around gender and examples of a just energy transition from other countries and some of the policy questions. And then we sort of raise some questions about a way forward, and we're a small group, so it would be fantastic if we can all engage together and make this, I think you call it a seminar, so let's engage as a seminar discussion. It would be really interesting. So I think some of you may know that, I mean, everyone will know we've got COP26 taking place in Scotland at the moment. As we speak, the engagements and discussions are taking place. So I think in the opening addresses, it was reiterated we're at a tipping point globally and have been for a while. So we have to lower emissions. And I think it's interesting that we keep talking about this, and South Africa is the 13th highest world emitter. And we need to come up with really tangible ways of bringing temperatures down and to address some of the key questions, which we are going to be raising today with a focus on energy access and energy poverty. So the transition, the energy transition is unavoidable really across the globe. But in South Africa, I'm going to talk a little bit about the coal situation. And so first of all, let's just focus on what do we mean by a just transition and a just energy transition. And it's very much a term that everybody is voicing at the moment, but there isn't complete agreement around the definition or the ambition and the extent of what it means. So we all know we have to lower the emissions. I think a just transition for us is a more holistic, taking into consideration resilience, biodiversity, ecosystems, and the just energy transition is looking obviously much more specifically at energy, which is the focus of our discussion today. I think probably most people know that the just transition was developed out of labor movements in America. And it was about protecting workers and in the transition. I think we're seeing it I think more recently, the debates are really about the concern with jobs, inequities, gender, and in particular, the justice is about giving voice to the poor. And not only workers, people who are going to be most affected or have already been affected by high emissions. So in South Africa, that would be the coal regions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And I think this cartoon, which was done by local South African cartoonists, is really apt and pertinent. So, you know, our unemployment in South Africa is extremely high. So in the formal sector, in the first quarter of this year, there were 32.6% of the population were unemployed, with the expanded figures high as 43%, and youth jobless at 74.7%. And there are, I think there were figures at one point about 60% of youth under the age of 25 never worked and probably never will. So, well, under current circumstances. And people eke out livings in the informal job sector. So our country is faced very much with what are called the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. And we are a hugely unequal country, and despite democracy, we still have high levels of poverty. I know that we're not the only country, but we're focusing today on South Africa. And then let's start looking at the issues of energy poverty, which we want to talk about. So what is an energy poverty? And I think it's important to start off by saying that we see, and I don't think it's not just us globally, I think energy is considered a basic human right. It doesn't actually, it's not formally stated in our constitution, but it's implied. And I won't go into any more detail on that, but I think globally it's pretty much accepted that having access to energy is a basic human right. So what is energy poverty for us? It's a lack of adequate, affordable, reliable, and environmentally sound energy services to support livelihoods, development, and so on. So it's important that energy poverty is not just about access to electricity, but also about affordability. It generally is affecting low-income households more, and I think it's more prevalent in the global south than the global north. And in the paper, we draw a little bit on some of the developments that have been made globally, the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sustainable Energy for All, and so on. But these are important goals in reducing poverty and energy poverty, but we're not seeing adequate shifts. And if you look in South Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, the figures, particularly in Sub-Saharan, other countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are really bad around access to electricity, particularly, or safe energy. COVID has obviously impacted on energy prices, people's affordability, job losses. I'm not going to go into that in any detail. Maybe people have questions. I think what's important is that you cannot manage poverty if you're not looking at energy poverty, and you cannot deal with a just energy transition unless you are bringing together the low carbon transition with energy access and managing energy poverty generally. So that for us, these two are quite critical in defining and understanding what the goals might be. So let's just look a little bit at the background, the South African background. Most of our electricity is produced from coal. And our economy for the last 100 years or so has been built around a minerals energy complex, as it's called, the MEC, which is a lot of mining and energy intensive industries have developed around coal and cheap electricity including Eskom, which is our monopoly, vertical monopoly for electricity, and Sasol, which is coal to oil. And so coal generates about 92% of our electricity. And between the Eskom and Sasol, the coal to liquid fuels, they account for about 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And that's quite hectic. So outside of these big industries and the mines, a substantial amount of the country's electricity is consumed in the built environment, which would include the residential sectors. Although, interestingly, when you start to look at this, the emissions are high in the built environment, but transport has a higher, the most energy consumption in the cities, particularly, is in the transport sector. And that's because of our spatial inequality that is born out of the sort of apartheid history, if you like, but actually has been further entrenched since democracy. So what we're seeing is that the formal houses that were built were tended for the poor, were built on the periphery of our cities, and urbanization, like as is the case across the world, has been growing. We're about 66% urbanized, and people move to the cities in search of better opportunities. And in fact, what's happening, as you can see on the right-hand side, that there's a growth of the informal sector. So just to give a little bit of background, 36% of our population had access to electricity in '94. I mean, that's a very hectically low number. Today, because of the electrification program, which has been amazing, actually, about 86–87% of people have access to electricity, and some municipalities have very high figures. It was expected to be 100%, but that hasn't happened. And despite all these changes, I think about 47% of our population are still living in energy poverty, which is particularly found in the informal sector and amongst backyard dwellers. So the informal housing are shacks that are built generally on unproclaimed land, which means they're not, they cannot be serviced with basic service infrastructure. So where do we see energy poverty presenting itself? I mentioned earlier about affordability. So what happens is people, and Nthabi will talk about the subsidy to help people who have access to electricity, but even when they do have electricity, they cannot afford to buy it. And so people are using multiple fuels which are unsafe, and that includes paraffin, candles, and wood and coal, as you can see from this picture. And then the risk of fires in informal settlements are like a domino effect, and we have had massive problems there. We've also seen the health impacts from where you get children imbibing paraffin because it's bought in bottles like an old Coke bottle, and the child doesn't know. But we also are seeing, particularly in the coal regions like in Mpumalanga, which is home to most of the coal mines and coal-fired power stations. I was there recently. It's actually quite depressing and shocking. You can smell the coal in the air. Children are suffering from many respiratory diseases, can't go to school. It's actually quite terrible. But that's not only apparent in Mpumalanga, where coal might be used indoors. You get that in other regions. There are also many people without access to any electricity still, and even in an area like Mpumalanga, there's a coal-fired power station in the distance, and these people have no electricity. And I think another feature of energy poverty is that low-income houses can spend up to 20% of their income on their energy needs, whereas a person like myself will spend maybe 2%, which is quite a huge difference. We do have we have had some really innovative work done. So you can see in the background there what's called the Maple system, where municipalities have put in a system of electrification in an area which is unproclaimed. So you might have several shacks using one inverter. And yeah, I think that's been quite innovative in our country. I think that I've tried to give a bit of a background, and I think now Nthabi's going to go into more the gender and some of the policy. And Nthabi, I think you might have to tell me when to move the slide on.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. You can just maybe stop sharing, and then I can share my slides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And maybe before we carry on to my section, if people have questions on what you have presented, or we can just wait until the end.
I don't know how to stop sharing now. Pause share. Stop share. Okay. There.
Okay.
There we go.
So, and I will start sharing my screen. It doesn't seem like I have permission. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you please give me permission again, Zainab?
Yes, so just a second, I'll do that. Make you a co-host.
I'm sorry again about my camera. No idea what's happening today.
You should be able to share it now.
Yes, thank you. You can see my screen,
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I should be on gender and energy transition. Can you just tell me the title of the screen of the slide that you're seeing?
Yeah, you want the next slide, number 17.
Yes.
On yours. Yeah. There. That's it.
Great. Okay. So I will be just continuing with the presentation, and I will talk about the gender and energy transition. As you can all imagine, gender is quite important when we're talking about energy, and I'm not too sure of how many of you, have seen maybe studies, that are talking about gender and energy, but just to give a background and maybe just to also link to this, is that when we are talking about energy, it's quite important to also touch on the issue of gender because of the differences and how men and women access and use energy. So with regards to just energy transition policies and strategies, there is a need for them to prioritize gender mainstreaming. And what this means is that each policy and strategy intended to bring an energy transition that is just should consider gender issues. And we should also consider how the transition impacts on men and women. Who benefits from the transition opportunities is also quite important. And by benefit, we mean, people that will get the opportunities maybe to set up energy utilities and own, the energy plants and all that. Who gets those opportunities is quite important. Who gets employed is quite important. Are they male or female? And if there is an imbalance there, we should also question why there is such an imbalance. Also, an energy transition should ensure a gender-balanced energy sector, which is what I've just touched on. And we also need to look at what can renewable energy industrialization offer. In this regard, we mean who is eligible for training for green jobs, how many men and how many women? Because right now we're seeing, again, in the context of South Africa, we're looking at coal mines that are to shut down because, of the transition to cleaner energy sources and renewable energy. But who is working at those coal mines at the moment? It's mostly men. And who would benefit from the green jobs? So if we see an energy transition as a start button or a restart button, and if we can put it in that way, we should ensure that there is equity and equality, that people get job opportunities, get opportunities to participate in the energy sector equally, instead of, this job is only set aside for men and these jobs are only set aside for women. Who gets the training, I think, is most important, and what kind of training do they get? Last week, we had a conversation about this, okay, women that are in the energy sector are mostly in admin and they are cleaning. When you're talking about green jobs, what is it that you're offering to them? Are they going to get training so that they are able to also have the skills that the men are also going to be given, like the technical skills? Do they have qualifications for that? So there's quite a lot that needs to be considered when you want to bring about a gender balance. And this is something that we cannot also run away from, because there's quite a huge gender imbalance, especially in low-income countries or in low-income areas of South Africa. So we also, when you think about, gender, you also think of the women-headed households that are more vulnerable and tend to be more exposed to energy poverty. So therefore, a just energy transition should focus on ensuring that vulnerable women-headed households have access to safe and affordable energy services. And we know that it is quite difficult, like Peta was saying, in South Africa, there is a high rates of electrification, more than 80%, but a lot of people, up to about maybe 47% or even more, are experiencing energy poverty. And that means that people just cannot afford to pay for these services. They don't have access to these services or to pay for electricity or modern energy services. And they rely on, they end up relying on traditional fuels and not healthy energy sources. There's also the issue of gender safety and security and, the impacts of not having access to energy. So a lot of low-income earners that live in informal communities where crime rates are high. There's also an issue of gender-based violence where women are often targeted. in areas that are not well lit at night, women do not feel safe. And this is not only in South Africa. We've had stories from Kenya, we've heard stories from other countries as well. Nepal as well, India. So the issues are not only at night, where there are no modern energy services. People also often rely on traditional fuels, like I've said, like wood, which is often collected by women. And not only do they have to walk long distances, but they are often exposed to gender-based violence dangers on the way. So a just energy transition should consider these issues, which are quite important. So this picture, I think it should give you an idea. This is a woman that also taken in Mpumalanga, where Peta was, and was presented. We had a photo presentation by Dalen Paul, which was quite amazing. And it just shows how women usually have to collect wood, and this is what they rely on, regardless of where they are living, regardless that they live in an area that, where electricity is generated for the whole country. You find that women are most vulnerable and have to still rely on these traditional fuels that they have to collect, that they have to walk long distances to and be exposed to these dangers. So we also looked with our policy brief. We looked at the energy poverty and energy transition in the global south and global north, and just touch on.
And Toby, I've only got on the screen your gender slide. I don't think you're changing the slides.
Oh, it's not moving.
Yeah. It didn't move for me. I don't know about other people.
Yeah,
has it moved now?
No.
Hello, you need to make it slideshow so that you can move it. If you can put it on slideshow, then you'll be able to move it.
Yeah, I thought it was on slideshow.
No, it's not.
Show taskbar. Let's see.
It's on the top, the toolbar at the top. It says slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay. Lord. Let me try again. Okay, maybe I should get out of. Can you now all see that I'm out of the presentation mode? No?
No. If you want, I could.
Yeah, maybe please load your stuff. I'm sorry about this.
It was on slideshow for a while, but
it was,
yeah, on presenter mode. Yeah.
Shall I do it then? Sure.
Let me just try for the last time, Peter. Does that work?
Well, not for me. I don't know.
Okay. So I will stop presenting so that you can upload your slides, Peter. I'm sorry about this.
Can you all see now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can also see.
So I've got to try and, okay. Sorry, I was trying to turn off my I was trying to mute myself, but I can't do it.
Okay,
so
no,
I'll just be quiet.
There's no background noise. So maybe if you can go back to that picture, because it's the picture that I thought everyone was seeing of this lady that has to, walk and collect wood, even though she's living in this area that is generating electricity for almost the whole country, which is, quite ironic as well. So if we can go on to the next slide, Peter, thank you. So here I'm talking about energy poverty and energy transition in the global south and north. So between 50 and 125 million Europeans cannot afford to pay for adequate indoor thermal heating in winter and cooling in summer, which was such a surprising issue or figure rather, because you think, Europeans, they're not all wealthy, but one would think that, they've got better buildings, they've got better systems in place, there's, internal heating. But it seems like, over the past few years, research that has been done, also commissioned by the EA, the European Union, has shown that in more and more countries, people are suffering from energy poverty. And it's mostly low-income households, people that are living in older buildings, and it's older people that do not have an income anymore. Their pensions are not enough to cover their energy bills, and what more is that the energy bills are going up, just like we're experiencing right now in Europe, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in the UK, and some countries are even considering reopening their coal mines and starting to generate electricity using coal because of the issue that gas prices have gone up so much that everything else has become so expensive. I know a lot of countries in Europe are looking at putting in more money for their subsidies, particularly for low-income households, because the winter is coming and a lot of homes are getting colder and colder. Some surveys have shown that people have said that this winter they think that they are not going to put their heating systems on just because the energy prices have gone up in some areas 3 times more than that they were last year. So in order for them not to be, in debt, this is what they are going to do. They will rather live in cold houses. So like I said, the old buildings are quite inefficient. So some interventions that have come through subsidies, for depending on the type of areas where people live and the type of targeted people that are to get those benefits, like the elderly and people that are living in old buildings. So a renovation of old buildings for social housing. So looking at insulation. I know that in the UK, this is one of the things that the government is doing. And on the other hand, many global South countries don't have energy access. Like 80% of the Sub-Saharan African population still depends on traditional fuels. Now, we've seen this, and we've seen like in many countries, when you think of South Africa and our electrification rate is much higher than many of the African countries. So you can imagine countries that don't even have 50% electrification, but the people depend on a lot of informal areas that you find in the cities of many African countries, do not have access to modern energy services, and they depend on traditional fuels. So there are high rates of energy poverty. You can go to the next slide, Peter. So looking at policies, in the South African context, currently there is no just energy transition policy in place, but there are some emerging transition frameworks. Unfortunately, none address energy poverty at the moment. There's been a call. We've seen the Presidential Climate Commission and other organizations and institutions that are, trying to also now bring in the voices of the people, of different stakeholders, to try and put in, what is needed, what issues need to be looked at. And one of them, is energy poverty, which at the moment is not taking center stage. The subsidy policies available are outdated. we have seen energy prices going up, but the subsidies that have been given to people at the moment have not been adjusted. So many people are still getting, and I will talk to this in the next slide, but many people are still getting subsidies, which is an amount that they got maybe about 10 years ago. So that hasn't changed, even though the energy prices have hiked in the past few years. We also see that there are quite a lot of municipalities that are in debt, and they owe the utility some money, because they are working as distributors of energy to households, and there's now a problem whereby there are difficulties in the delivery of energy services and all basic services, because they do not have the money to do so. Next slide, please. So with regards to household energy subsidies in South Africa, and I recommend this report on the right. It's called Broken Promises. It's by Tracy Ledger, and it talks about the energy subsidies that are in place, particularly electricity subsidies that are in place in South Africa, and how they do not reach the people, the intended beneficiaries, mainly because of what is happening within the municipalities that are indebted and end up using that money that is set aside for these subsidies for other priorities within municipalities, and also just the lack of the way that these subsidies are supposed to be implemented. That's also quite a big problem within these municipalities, whereby you find that indigent households that are supposed to be getting these subsidies end up not getting them. Now, we have what we call the free basic electricity subsidy in South Africa, which was formulated in 2003. And this is for grid electrified households, which are regarded as indigent. So they earn a certain amount of money, and are mostly low income households. So depending on the municipality, each municipality has their own strategy on how they deliver this free basic electricity subsidy. It's about 50 units of electricity per month for household, but depending on the municipality and how well off that municipality is, it may be a little bit higher than that. And it's not so easy to access this, like I said earlier. And this Broken Promises report also touches on how difficult it is for those in low-income households to actually access this subsidy because of the criteria that they have to meet. You have to have these different types of documents. You have to show ownership of the house that you live in. So if you're living in an informal area whereby you don't have ownership of the land that you live in, because even your structure is not permanent, then it's difficult to access that. It doesn't take into consideration the backyard dwellers, people that are living in other people's yards as well. So there are a lot of negatives about these subsidies. We also have what we call the free basic alternative energy subsidy, which is meant for people that do not have grid electricity, but have like maybe have solar home systems, and this is targeted for them, whereby the municipality pays off the service provider to do monthly servicing of their solar system. And those that don't have solar systems get maybe the municipalities provide for them paraffin, which is kerosene in the UK, I think, candles, gel fuel, which is quite a big problem because it means that those households are getting fuels that are considered as dangerous. Like Peter was saying earlier, you find children drinking paraffin because it is bottled in like a cola bottle, and it can also cause a fire quite easily, which we see quite a lot of households, informal households in, especially in winter, just burn down because of the dangers of paraffin. And candles as well. We all know how dangerous that could be if to use candles, especially in informal areas that a fire can catch on quite easily. So, you know, we also have to consider what the role of a just energy transition and providing sustainable energy subsidies is in this case. So next slide, please, Peter. So in the previous slide, I talked about municipalities that provide, you know, different sources of free basic alternative energy services or subsidies to different households in the area. And that's just, you know, a graphic to show you the distribution of those particular municipalities that, again, going back to the point of high electrification rates in South Africa, more than 80%, you still see that, you know, due to energy poverty, people still rely on these other sources of energy: paraffin, candles, fire gel, and solar. So in conclusion, which is in the next slide, just, you know, also stating a way forward is that, you know, when we were concluding this policy brief, we were looking at, okay, what needs to be done then? How do we go forward? And yeah, we said there's a need for an integrated energy approach to deliver on a just energy transition, including better communication. So here we mean that, you know, for an energy transition to happen in a just way, there is a need for, you know, for the plans to be better communicated, especially to people that are going to be beneficiaries of this. And, you know, it's not only about renewable energy. What do you mean by that? It's not only about electricity, but we need an integrated energy approach whereby we deliver different sources of energy services to different sorts of people that need different sorts of services. There's also a need for innovative ways to provide access to the low-income households. Also a need to update energy policies and develop a concrete JET framework, which is what we've seen. You know, with outdated policies, it's quite difficult to move forward because it means that the people that you know, you intend the service for are not catered for at the end. So if an energy transition is to take place and for it to be just, we need to consider all of those issues. There's also a need to engage with communities and workers so that their voices are part of the solution, which is what we have seen, what we have observed. There are some platforms that are giving, you know, workers a voice and communities a voice, but not many of them, particularly in South Africa, where a lot of people are going to be affected negatively by loss of jobs and all that. But also at the same time, they do not know what this energy transition means for them, for their futures as well. There's also a need to develop skills and training opportunities for renewable energy industrialization. And like I said, this also needs to be gender inclusive. You know, it cannot just be focusing on people that have jobs right now. Those are going to be losing jobs, and then where you look for new job opportunities for them. But how are you going to cater for everyone, even those that do not have jobs at the moment? So yeah, the next slide. Oh yeah, just to emphasize on the you know, issues covered in the previous slides, like there must be a meaningful community participation and engagement, because we have seen the big disconnect, you know, whereby you have these policy intentions, but the implementation does not happen, or does not happen in the intended way because of the, you know, disconnect. There's lack of public participation, you know, and where it does happen, happen. You just find just a few people are consulted and not the entirety of the communities. So it's just for box ticking purposes, and just people's voices are not being heard. Whose voices do we have as we are talking about a just energy transition, and how just is it when people's voices are not heard? And the last slide. Yes, also about improving communication, the importance of energy education and having these mobile demonstration units, which is also quite important. When you are talking about renewable energy, what are you talking about exactly? And this reminds me of work that we did in some rural areas where we were looking at the impacts of having these solar home systems and and hybrid systems with solar and wind. And even though people had access and could now use electricity for lighting, they were not so impressed by it, because they were like, I still cannot cook, I still cannot do my ironing and do my laundry and all of that. And that was also, with the lack of education, because people were not told the full story about renewables, which could work in a negative way for when you're trying to promote such technologies to people. It's best to list what the shortcomings are and what other solutions one can bring for cooking and for other energy services that people could benefit from. Yeah, I think this was the last slide. Thank you very much for your attention. Apologies from my side for all the technical problems I've had today, and I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I don't know if I can see. Right. So much of unpacking to do from both your presentations. So I'll open the floor to questions. I have many of my own. And so anybody who has any questions for any one of them, for both of them, just unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask. I mean, any questions or comments, any clarifications? Sure. God's will, yes.
Maybe I'll come in, because it's always hard when there's been a long presentation. What we've tried to give a kind of background picture, and then some of the issues around a just energy transition. And in a presentation like this, it's quite hard to go into the complexities, and Nthabi was talking about the allocation of subsidies to people, but the amount of free electricity is 50 kilowatt hours, which is like very tiny. And the way in which it's financed is that national government does a transfer, and it's based on the number of indigents that are deemed to be in a municipality. And so I think that there's a figure that there are like around 10 million households that are registered to receive it. And so that allocation of money goes to the municipality, but only 1.8 million people are getting the subsidy. And that's partly the complexities around the way in which municipalities have to deliver services, which is quite tricky. So if we come back to COP26, which is happening at the moment, I mean, how be interesting to know, the people who are here, that are still here, what your work or your studies are, and whether you've got ideas. How does one move? How do we move away from the kind of the language, the technical language in the space to see changes on the ground, which it's really an enormous number of people in South Africa alone, and that, you know, Nthabi touched on countries that other countries that are experiencing problems. But what can we do that might shift problems in this, well, to try and get implementation in the space? Be really good to hear your thoughts.
I don't know if I can come in. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Olamide. I'm doing my PhD in Sustainable Energy Technology at the University of Nottingham. I'm also from Nigeria, which is part of a country in the Sub-Saharan Africa. This issue of energy, I mean, the dynamics that you have asked, I know that, I think, for example, in Africa, it still seems like it's not yet being conceived as it should. I feel like there's been a lot of things that are being said, but the grassroots people still have not been carried along in terms of the implementation. I had asked a question in the chat to say what policy implementation strategy do you suggest to ensure that there's equality in energy distribution, because you have identified that there is inequality or there's inequality in the implementation strategy. And I think that as a researcher, there's a lot that is being done. A lot of research is being carried out, but the lacuna between the research being carried out and actually implementing those research in the localities where it is mostly needed is still an issue that we are still trying to solve. So I don't know, how do we bridge the gap between the research, policy implementation, and the end user? It's more of a question than a contribution, actually.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure Nthabi will have thoughts on that. I mean, the issue around distribution, it's very clear from the research that Nthabi pointed to, the Tracy Ledger research. She says that issues around distribution really need to be addressed to address the problems of equality or inequity in the space. So yeah, you ask I'm just going back to your question in the chat, you know, what policy can we suggest? And for me, there's such complexity in how a municipality, for instance, receives funding, and how electricity is distributed and how it's generated. I mean, in South Africa, we're looking at unbundling Eskom having transmission, generation, and distribution power. That might open a space. I think what we were advocating in our policy brief is that, in a sense, it's got to be looked at from a holistic perspective to get to integrate, rather than there being this disconnect and separate areas of work being done. But I think I hand over to Nthabi.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Olamide, for your question. Yeah, I agree. It's also quite important. So with regards to policy implementation strategy, I'm not sure what I can suggest, but like Peter has said, you know, we call for this integration of, you know, like service delivery. But I think with regards to the implementation, what I have seen firsthand is that there's just a disconnect. I think if you can refer to the last slide of this presentation, there's just a disconnect between the policymakers and the beneficiaries of those policies. You know, whereby you as a policymaker are sitting in an office and, you know, just making these policies, this is, you know, people need these services and this is what we're going to provide for them, without actually putting thought into how those services really, I mean, the detail of how that service is going to be delivered, who is involved in that chain. And that is quite important, I think, to ensure that everyone that is involved in the chain is on the same page. They understand what the mandate is, they understand what the end goal is, and why the policy is there and why it has to be implemented in a certain way. And yes, along the way, we may have problems. The way that the policy is being implemented, maybe it's not really what the people need, but it also shows us that communication is quite important. You cannot deliver what people do not want. They are just simply not going to use it. So it's about, you know, with energy, it seems like the solution that we always come to is when people do not have energy, we always think, okay, we're going to provide them with electricity, which over and over and over has shown that it's not the only solution. Yes, it has its place, it plays its role, but we should also note the reality that people use multiple energy sources because they have different needs for that. People are running small businesses within their homes. They're not going to use electricity for all of that. People cook different foods. You know, there are traditional foods that are only tasty if you use a certain type of fuel for them. So how do you integrate and bring those services together? But how does that reflect in the policies that you deliver? Are your policies flexible enough to ensure that when these, you know, issues come up, your policies can adapt to what people need? So I think, you know, the transparency, the openness, and ensuring that everyone along the chain from formulation to implementation, you know, understands the mandate and know what we're talking about, and that the end user, which is the most important layer here, is considered, their voices are considered. I don't know if that answers you, but yeah, that's my answer for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. I think that there was something you said that really hit the nail on the head. You talked about the fact that it's not only electricity. I think that's a major strategy that could be used, because a lot of, like, from the country I come from, there's so much noise about renewable energy, and the renewable energy that they talk about is only solar panels. Meanwhile, there are a lot of other things that can be used to divide or to distribute the energy needed in the household, which I think you're really on point on that. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tandeka has her hand up. I think.
Thank you.
The floor. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I just also wanted to add on the lack of, like, the challenges with implementation. So I also happen to work for the city of Cape Town and working on issues of energy poverty. And it is a very challenging space, and I agree with the fact that there's lack of community engagement. I think we still do not know how it's supposed to happen, or what is the avenue to actually have a meaningful community engagement process around energy. And I think one of the main challenge is the finance, the policies around the finance, how we can use public funding for some of the for projects that can alleviate energy poverty. That's actually one of the main challenge at the moment. It's really focused on electricity. Like Nthabi has said, it's very difficult to innovate, using other energy forms, or, it's very, very difficult, a very constrained environment. And the other issue is that there's a big challenge when it comes to municipalities and the provision of electricity, for example, to poorer households. One of them being that municipalities make money, generate revenue from electricity sales. And if they were to increase the amount of money that they give to allocation of units that they give to poorer households, that means that they're taking away from their own revenues. I think that has been one of the issues, to the extent that, for example, in the city of Cape Town, we get told so many times that the city is already subsidizing lower income households a lot, because they have to do grid maintenance. And the estimate is that the electricity department spends about 500 Rand per household, just to keep the lights on, even if, because they don't use a lot of electricity. So it actually costs the municipality more money to actually have the household electrified. So it's a very, very challenging, it's a challenging situation where you have to deal with like finances and provision or energy poverty alleviation where it's needed. Yeah, that's my contribution.
Yeah, I think thank you for bringing that in, Thandeka. The other challenge is in a country like South Africa, where the wealthier households and the small businesses are cross-subsidizing for the poor. And what we're finding here is that more and more customers are putting rooftop PV, they're putting solar panels on their roofs, and that's adding a further challenge to municipal revenue and the cross-subsidy. So I think, that's why we really want to try and advocate a holistic approach, in that government departments have a specific key performance areas, and other people, I suppose businesses have their own position from where they're coming in, and civil society equally. So it becomes, unless we can work collaboratively, I think it's also quite tricky. And then something else I was thinking about that we didn't bring in because we didn't want to talk for too long, is that here in South Africa, government has built around 3 million houses since democracy, but initially they were built without any insulation, no ceilings, and so that impacts where there's no thermal inputs into the housing, that has a huge impact on use of energy. So it's another criteria for energy poverty. You know, in a shack, there are no ceilings in any event. Yeah, so I think Thandeka, it was good to have your input there. Thanks.
I'm going to jump in with a question of my own. So thank you for the presentation, and I'm working on food sovereignty for my own PhD thesis, and so I'm looking into more radical, policy approaches to frame environmental, solutions. So, I mean, I have one critical response to when we frame the problem of energy as energy poverty and access to energy as a kind of claim or entitlement. How is that going to keep us away from the problems that we've had with the development discourse? I mean, much of the terminology in these in not just your own research, but when people bring up energy as a right to energy or energy poverty and terming it, I mean, framing it in a way of poverty. So, I mean, how are we going to ward against all the problems that development itself has brought in with again, we see renewable energy being, these donor type agencies, foreign control coming into our countries, like in the global south again, to make this transition happen. And again, gender comes up as one of the benefits of the just energy transition. So my question again is about framing the problem and whether that itself needs to be questioned to then keep us away from getting into the same development type of loopholes. So anyone who wants to answer that.
Thank you, Zainab. I'm not sure if I understood your question, but you're talking about the issue of, access to energy as a right. So what you're saying is that how do we ensure that that doesn't bring us to like development problems where we rely on external aid, or am I getting it wrong?
Yes, yes, somewhat in that light, that the entire development discourse, I mean, over the 70s, 80s, that the global south needs to develop, and the money that went into doing that, whether we see the same thing happening with the energy transition, where again China or some other countries are leading that transition, and again this is termed as framed in the sense that this is what needs to be done, this is the best way forward, and so on. So
I get you. Yes, I get you. And I think here the most important thing to look at is the conditions of these loans or whatever funding that is coming into these countries, which is I think this is also the voice of labor that we hear also in South Africa, is under what conditions are we getting these investments or this funding, and how is it going to advantage or disadvantage the local people, the people that are meant to be benefiting from this. And I think then that goes into the way we also are taking on our policies and governance, and how they protect as well our people and the services that are delivered to them. So because if we are the ones that make, you know, or borrow under certain conditions, and we make clear what those conditions are and who the beneficiaries are supposed to be, then perhaps those you know, that funding and that or development under that funding could work. But if it's one-sided, where, you know, the conditions are dictated to us by the North, then we indeed are going to run into those problems. And yes, I mean, the issue of energy as a right, if you think of it like Peter was saying, particularly in the South African case, it's not you know, in the constitution that energy is a right, but it can be inferred from other, you know, sections of the constitution where people have the right to, you know, a safe environment or safe housing and all of that. Then it means that in that place there needs to be access, you know, to safe energy, and people are able to use you know, modern and safe energy services. And that is a right, because it also affects other issues of nutrition, because if you don't have energy sources, it means that you're not able to cook food. It means that you will suffer malnutrition. So energy as a right should also be looked at in those kinds of ways. I see, Peter, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I want to support what you're saying and then answer the question in a slightly different way. You know, I think we've both worked in this field for a long time, and when you hear people talk about, I think what Nthabi spoke about, gender-based violence, because you know, the toilet may be quite far from the shack or the home, and a girl child or women are having to go outside and it's unsafe. There's maybe no lighting outside their home in the public areas. I've heard, we did a documentary in my previous job where a woman was so happy with solar lamps that were provided, and her child was able to study with these lamps rather than with candles. And she was so proud of how her daughter had got through her exams and was now at university. And I think, you know, so that basic human right is really for us quite critical. But I want to take a slightly different stab at your question, which I maybe am not hearing it properly, but you raise a question about development. And you know, what do we mean by development? And you know, it's a critical question at the moment around do we all want to aspire to live in a particular way, and then why can't everyone have access to that? But the downside of it is there aren't the resources on this planet to provide for that. But then why is it, despite all the various global platforms, that there are so many people living in poverty and energy poverty, and it's not okay. And where are we going wrong in development that so many people live in that way? And you know, in our paper we talk about the amount of electricity produced in Sub-Saharan Africa, apart from South Africa, and the amount is equivalent to one European city, I think it was. You know, we are all aspiring towards a development, but what is it and why are we failing? And for me, that's a critical question. And in part, some of my interest lies in the kind of political economy. So if you take South Africa, that's built around this minerals energy complex that we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of capital and money and power associated with that, which will impact on how we implement our policies. But that is a particular view of mine. Yeah, I can't say more about it, but maybe I'll stop there. I don't know if I've gone off tangent completely.
Absolutely not. This is, of course, just a conversation and the start of other conversations, hopefully, but interesting responses. Just before maybe we close, and if anyone still wants to step in to comment or raise another question, you can do that. I wanted to again ask both of you, given that y'all have so much of field experience working with in different contexts in South Africa, is there any one or two case studies or any one scenario that stood out in terms of that you could call a success story for energy access, or a good policy that was implemented somewhere, taking into account all the actors, beneficiaries, and so on? So what would success look like? Have you come across any of that in your field work or empirical research?
Well, I mean, Thandeka, you can maybe talk to this, but I mean, Cape Town, the city of Cape Town was one of the first cities to start the maypole, which I spoke about earlier, the maypole system to electrify people in informal settlements. And it really was innovative. And I think, you know, I've done work over the years with metros and municipalities. I do think Cape Town is doing pretty good work and has quite a lot of work around energy poverty. In the just transition space, there are projects happening in Mpumalanga where, I mean, even Eskom is trying to repurpose some of the mines of the power stations, and there's an intention. So it's how to harness and collaborate, but I think that there are examples, and if we take also the public participation, that is tricky. I think Thandeka, you spoke about it, that there's a policy that's entrenched from even before the constitution, from the struggle era in the country. We are struggling to harness that history into the present discourse. But there are attempts, and there's a lot of work, but I don't know, I don't have many examples that I can think of right now.
Just to get in there, and I think at the beginning, like in 2003, the free basic electricity policy was, I think, what we could say a good example of government trying to ensure that those that cannot afford grid electricity at least are able to have access to some basic, electricity access, because the issue was that people were not able to afford electricity, without the subsidies. And unfortunately, nothing much has been done, to improve on that policy, to move on with the times and the high electricity prices that we see now. Hence, we see high percentages of energy poverty. But I think at the beginning, the intention to do good was there. And that was a success, because you could, it lifted that burden for people, because at first here they've got electricity connections, but they cannot use electricity. But now with that subsidy, they were able to, at least use the light and use it for just low consuming appliances, which was a big plus for people at that time. Unfortunately, now we really have to go back to that policy and just make sure that it caters for the reality that is happening right now. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Any last final comments before we close? It's been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, well, just to say thank you very much for inviting us to your seminar. Unfortunately, not a lot of people came, but it was quite a good conversation with everyone that was in attendance. Thank you very much for giving us this time.
I would like to also say thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. You both are very accomplished in your fields, and thank you for your time and working with the time zones and different change of schedules and everything that we went through to get here. So thank you for giving us, sharing with us your work, and I'm happy to share the recording with you later, and it will be available for LEDC members to learn from in the future. So yes, with that, yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.